Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar talking about mental health. This webinar is the second in a series of webinars that we have planned between now and June next year that will assist us to grow our understanding of early childhood mental health, but also support the processes for implementing the KidsMatter framework. For the next 60 minutes or so, we will be learning and reflecting together about how we think, how we feel, and how we actually do talk about mental health. This is a topic that is integral to implementing the KidsMatter Early Childhood Framework, but most importantly, it's essential for growing healthy minds. For those of you who are new to KidsMatter, I'd just like to give you a brief outline about who we are and what we do. We are a national mental health initiative that reaches out to early childhood education and care services in schools to support them in promoting and supporting the wellbeing of children. We're funded by the Department of Health and Beyond Blue, and the initiative has grown into what it is today through a great partnership between Beyond Blue, the Australian Psychological Society, and Early Childhood Australia. So as far as today progresses, we'll meet the presenters shortly, but I just wanted to run through a couple of housekeeping things as well. You will notice that there is a chat box to the left of your screen, and there'll be lots of opportunity to communicate with each other. I can see there's been lots of activity while you've been waiting for us to come on air as well, so it's great to see everyone working it. Just remember, you can get rid of the chat by clicking the little triangle to the right of the chat box, and you can also make it appear again when you want the chat to come back again. You also have some opportunity to interact with us and each other through the polls that we'll be hosting throughout the day. So one last thing before we progress any further, everyone will receive a certificate today, and if you are watching as a group of people, please make sure that you fill out the certificate, fill out the survey at the end of today's session with everyone's names and details so everyone can receive those certificates. And today, I'd also like to acknowledge that we're all meeting on country. And as a way of acknowledging this, I invite you to type in the country you are on in the chat section to the bottom left of your screen. I'm actually on Ghana land at the moment, and while everyone else is popping in where they are from and where they are, I'd like to also pay my respects to elders of the past, present and future, for they hold the memories, traditions and the culture and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Throughout today's webinar, you will learn a little more about the experiences of each of today's presenters, Janelle Bowler, one of the KidsMatter Early Childhood Facilitators, and Early Childhood Educator, Joanne Crammond, who is currently Manager of 2 Early Childhood Services in the ACT. There's also a few other KidsMatter facilitators floating around, Sarah Richardson and Kerry Bidwell. They'll be making comments and providing some extra support throughout the chat, so keep an eye out for them too. So before I go any further, I'd like to say a big hi to Janelle and Joanne. Welcome to today's webinar.
Thanks, Amelia. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I'm Janelle.
I'm Joanne. Today our focus will be on why is it important to have a conversation about mental health, who conversations could be with. We will go on to explore words that we use and ideas that we have about mental health, and we'll finish by returning our attention to mental health in early childhood. So, how comfortable do you feel at the moment about discussing mental health or mental health difficulties? Amelia is going to lead us through a poll asking that question to get an idea of how the groups in this virtual room feel.
Excellent, thanks Jo. So I'm just going to pop the first poll up for everyone to start with. How comfortable do you feel, Janelle?
I am feeling more and more comfortable the longer I've been working in this field. But it does take a while. It does take a while, and it takes lots of talking with other people. And while we're talking about comfort, it's really important for everybody today to think of themselves and look after themselves as we go through this discussion that we're having about mental health, because sometimes unexpected feelings can emerge. And we'll be asking today for you to contribute a lot. So, and that is through the chat box on the bottom left-hand corner, but only contribute what you feel comfortable about contributing. only feel comfortable if you feel okay about it, and be aware of confidentiality, because there are a lot of people in this webinar today. And if something does feel uncomfortable for you, please use one of the phone numbers on our self-help page, or phone a friend and have a chat about it. So how comfortable are other people feeling about talking about mental health?
Well, today we've got, majority of people are going between very comfortable and somewhat comfortable, which is great. And we've got a few people who've popped in, it depends, and somewhat comfortable. And I guess it's great that people are feeling this way about discussing things in relation to mental health. And one of the things that's popped into my mind as people have responded is that I wonder how we can make sure that everyone who is within our early childhood services can also feel that same level of comfort. Or if they do all feel that same level of comfort, how do we identify where they're feeling? I'd also like to just note that I'm popping in the chat boxes links to the poll results, so people are able to save them and maybe use them in their reflective practice with the broader team or during staff meetings, those sort of things.
So why is it...
Over to you, Janelle. That's all I was going to say.
So why is it important to have conversations about mental health? So we're just going to move on to our next slide. I think we've moved too far. Oh no. So we know that early childhood education and care services don't operate in isolation. They're made up of a combination of communities, educators, families, children, and a part of a much larger community. But while I'm talking, use the chat to note who you do connect with in your community. Every single person in each of these communities, regardless of their age, has mental health, just as they have physical health. And mental health affects how we think, feel, and act, helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. And conversations help develop a shared language and understanding of mental health, and this offers a framework of thoughts or a context that can help us in our everyday lives and in the lives of others. A shared understanding offers added perspective to all those views of mental health. So today's session offers an opportunity for people with a wide range of experiences to share their understandings. So who? We each have mental health, and we each have many experiences that influence how we see, feel, and talk about mental health. And one way to explore who the best people are to have conversations with is to clarify what and who influences our own mental health. We can already see from the chat the range of people we connect with regularly as part of our work. As Joanne, Amelia and I talk about our own experiences, make a note in the chat of your experiences that have influenced your own thoughts and feelings about mental health. So, Joanne, what are the experiences that influence your thoughts and feelings about mental health?
So in 2010, I participated in the KidsMatter pilot program. It was through being introduced to this framework that I developed a particular interest in promoting and enhancing young children's mental health. It is important to me within my current role to keep updated on current research around brain development in the early years and the impact positive experiences can have on the developing child. Throughout my 10 years experiences, I have obtained my Bachelor of Education in Birth Wellbeing and have provided education and care for children from a variety of backgrounds. This has included children being identified to be at risk of experiencing mental health difficulties and children from families experiencing substance abuse. The earlier mental health conversations can take place, the more chance for stigma will lessen. Janelle, what have your experiences been?
So I'm really aware of both the professional and personal experiences that have had an impact on my thoughts and feelings about mental health. I'm also conscious that it's really difficult to separate my thoughts and feelings from my own mental health, as they're so closely connected. I worked out that I've been involved with over 1,500 children and families over my 30 years of teaching, so this is representative of a very wide range of individual stories. Each one of these children and family members had varying states of mental and physical health, as I did over those years. When I worked as an early childhood behaviour support teacher, I was more able to really see the world through the eyes of individual children and their families, particularly their world in the early childhood service. It was often necessary for me to communicate with other agencies that families were involved with, so I learned about that added perspective. Presenting and attending professional learning on the behaviour and social and emotional field gave me many opportunities to reframe my thinking. The way I think, feel and experience mental health today is the result of many, many, many years of living, starting from the day I was born. There have been traumatic or exciting times that I can remember that influenced my mental health and view of the world, but there are also many, many times that I can't remember. Working now with KidsMatter is just as much about continued personal learning as facilitating learning for others. A standout factor for me continues to be the holistic, systematic and flexible approach to mental health that KidsMatter uses. I realise that working as a behaviour support teacher, so important, fulfills a fairly narrow role, as mental health is everybody's business and needs that holistic approach. One of the first steps is to work towards that shared understanding and the shared language. And Amelia, what have your experiences been?
Thanks, Janelle. I guess like you, I've had a range of experiences, both as a social worker, as an educator, and also in my role at KidsMatter Early Childhood, that have influenced how I think and what I believe and what I understand to be mental health. But like you, it's also the contact that we have with people in our personal lives, in our day-to-day from childhood. And I think that's why I find working in this area in KidsMatter Early Childhood so rewarding, because everything that we do as adults is working towards building how children grow and how they develop their understanding of what mental health is. And I can see through the chat that there are lots of people have also been mentioning things like personal experiences and connections with community that has helped it. There's also been some things that have been coming through where people are identifying that there's been some changes in what they see to be mental health issues that could be occurring, like increased stress in family members, those sort of things. So we'll hopefully be able to touch base on some of that shortly. So I guess as we move on, it really does just show what the range of experiences that we have each had that have all contributed to how we talk about mental health, as well as how we understand it. And just as early childhood education and care services don't work in isolation, neither do we. So let's move on to the next section where we'll be looking at some of the words that we use. Whoops, I've gone too far for you. I'll go back for you. Over to you now. Oh, I've got one more question actually to ask you. As part of the KidsMatter framework, a challenge educators often face is to become comfortable talking about and using the term mental health with community, families and children. The comfort and ease of having these conversations, which our poll results showed that lots of people are feeling quite comfortable about having these conversations, does vary, and it does change the more we talk about mental health and what it is. However, often the words mental health are mental health are actually replaced by other words. And I guess we'd like to hear from people in the chat what words that sometimes they find are replaced, that replace mental health when we're actually trying to discuss mental health. So So we'll pop some up on the screen for people, but let us know in the chat what some of those terms that you use are as well. So Janelle, in your experience, how do you use the words mental health?
So really using the words mental health and early childhood is something I felt more comfortable talking about since starting with KidsMatter. I think at the same time there's a growing awareness in our community about the importance of mental health, and even listening to the news and watching the media, there seems to be more of a national conversation going about mental health now too. That's a relatively new thing. So I tend to use the words mental health when talking to educators, staff and other professionals, and when giving presentations. We talk about things affecting mental health or the possibility of mental health issues. So I tend to use words like social skills, emotional skills and behaviour when talking with children and families. So I wonder how much of this has to do with my journey with talking about mental health rather than how appropriate that is. Because I wouldn't say to somebody, how's your mental health today? Just like I wouldn't say, how's your physical health today? I'd be more likely to say something like, are you okay? Or how's your day going? Or how's your leg feeling? Or is your throat still sore? Rather than using the terms mental health or physical health. So is that similar for you, Joanne?
Absolutely. I should also mention it is extremely important to use the right words when talking about children's mental health. Unfortunately, there's still stereotyping and stigma attached to mental health. When you use these words with families, it forms an immediate barrier. They automatically think you are judging their parenting skills, their family life, or their children. The more we talk about children's mental health within the early childhood setting and community and engage in these conversations and language, the more comfortable we will all become about doing so. Amelia?
Excellent, thanks, Jo. And I guess as I mentioned, through my experiences and involvement with KidsMatter, I have learnt that we need to understand how we think about and define mental health, but we also need to have the ability to gauge the degree to which they actually share a similar understanding and level of comfort to us, or whether they share a completely different level of understanding or comfort. And I know you will both be unpacking a little bit more throughout today's session about what mental health is in terms of the definition a little later. But the term mental health, you're right, Jo, it does have stigma attached to it, and how people understand and define this is really, how people understand and define mental health really is influenced quite heavily by stigma. So in situations where differences in definitions do exist, as both an educator and a counsellor, I've always made it a priority to keep talking about mental health and using the term mental health, but sometimes it is by using less confronting terms that relate to mental health. However, it's always with an end goal in sight, I guess, around being able to talk and understand about mental health for what it is and not for how stigma actually defines it. And I guess in an essence, it's about naming mental health to not shame it, but to actually unshame it. So I guess from there, Joanne, I'm really interested to hear about who actually talks about mental health in your services.
So everyone caring and educating for children should be talking about mental health within the service. It is important for educators to keep their skills and knowledge up to date and participate in professional development and training, but it is just as important for the leadership team to also build on their skills and knowledge around mental health so they can support the educators, families and children, not only in the centre but also within the wider community.
So, Joanne, I remember that you engaged with KidsMatter during our pilot in 2010, and you now manage two services. One is a different service who's engaged with the KidsMatter initiative, and another that hasn't. So have you noticed the difference between the language used between all of those services? You've got such a wide range to choose from.
So Yes, a greater understanding and awareness of mental health has made me feel more comfortable about using the word mental health. And working across the two centres, there is a shared language and a shared understanding with the centre that has engaged in the KidsMatter initiative. It's all about that language and that shared understanding.
I'm wondering if the issue is more about being comfortable talking about the concept of mental health rather than the actual words we use. So now we're going to take a moment to listen to Tracy Simpson's view on mental health language in early childhood services. So this will be a short video.
One of the great things for a service that's involved in KidsMatter Early Childhood is that there's a language that's introduced around mental health. Some of the services that I've spoken to who at the beginning didn't think that they could use the term mental health, and when they introduced it along with social emotional well-being and social and emotional skill development, people started to use mental health language in a whole different way. And so educators, families all feel more confident about seeking help around mental health when the language is there, when it's become part of the everyday language of the early childhood service.
Excellent, thanks. That was a great little snippet of a video for us to talk about and actually consider how we start or we continue to introduce mental health into our everyday world. And I guess now it's a great time to actually take an opportunity to have a poll. While I pop the poll up, Janelle, that we've got up on the screen, do you want to say a few words as I do that?
So I think it was interesting hearing, we've been talking about mental health and shared understanding and shared language, and it's interesting that Tracy took that a step further and feels that people might actually feel more comfortable about seeking help if they have the language to use to ask for help. So I think that's a really important thing to remember.
Sorry, everyone. I'm just going to
wrong poll.
It's the wrong poll. I'm asking you as the same question. I pressed the wrong button. So here we go. Which words come to mind when you hear the words mental health?
So also using the words mental health is part of the story. Another part of today's story are the understandings and ideas we have about mental health. So to explore this a little more, think of the words that come to your mind as you're doing right now. And you may see some words in the poll, or you may think of your own words that you can add to the chat.
Definitely. And I guess what I sometimes do is I think about the words that come to my mind, but then I sometimes think about, well, from a broader community perspective, what are some of the words that actually could potentially come to other people's minds as well. And this is an activity that we do quite regularly when we're working with people around the professional learning and implementing the KidsMatter framework, isn't it, Janelle? And what are some of the things that people, what are some of the things you think that really come to mind? Although we're going to touch that shortly, aren't we? Touch on that.
We'll be talking about that in a minute. Yeah, and people are still adding.
I won't jump the gun on you. So I'm going to start the poll now, and lots of people are putting extra things in the chat too. So I'll just add the poll to the chat so people can save it if they like to. So we've got lots of things that are being mentioned around anxiety, stress, life coping, emotional regulation, nutrition. So yes, the connection, the mind-body connection has been brought up around as well. And Karen has also mentioned that the Are You OK campaign has really supported the way that what has she actually said? I think the Are You OK campaign has made a real difference to the mental health conversation, And I must admit, I agree as well. So I guess now that we've got people popping words up in the chat, we might make a word cloud or create a Facebook post for that in the future so that we can all share the different words that come to mind. So this leads us, I guess, thinking to what I wanted you to think about a minute ago around what the ideas are around what mental health is.
So as Amelia mentioned, KidsMatter often facilitate this kind of activity with groups of people, as it's one way of exploring the stigma that exists about mental health. And it's really common for people to focus on words that may indicate mental ill health, rather than mental health. And we're all really heavily influenced by our society and media. Hospitals and clinics that are designed to help people who are mentally unwell are called mental health facilities, not mentally unwell facilities or mental ill health facilities. And it's the same for mental health practitioners or mental health workers. Mental health is actually a state. It's neither positive or negative. It's helpful to think of mental health like we think of physical health. So we can also think of physical health as being a state. Both can be viewed as a continuum from being well to being unwell, so ranging from positive physical health to physical ill health, or positive mental health to mental ill health. People can have mental or physical health difficulties or issues without having a diagnosis or a disorder. For example, a headache could be the sign of a physical health issue or difficulty. If it continues or becomes more intense, is evident much of the time, a diagnosis by a qualified medical practitioner may be given, possibly with medication. Likewise, feeling a bit down one day could be seen as a mental health issue or difficulty. If that feeling is prolonged, is impacting on other areas of life, increases in intensity, or lingers, no matter who or what else is happening, a mental health diagnosis by a qualified mental health practitioner may be appropriate. But people with diagnosed chronic conditions like arthritis, for example, still have good or bad days, or good and bad moments in a day, just as people who have a diagnosed mental health condition like schizophrenia. So one way to think about mental health is to use Dr. Dan Siegel's analogy of a river, which is going to be our next slide. Coming. There it is. So if you think of one side of the river being full of reeds and tree branches, making it rigid and inflexible, you feel like you need to control everything and everyone. So the rigid's at the top of the screen. The other side is full of rapids, chaotic, tumultuous and confusing. You feel like you're being controlled by everything and everyone, but you have no control. Travelling in the middle of the river is like travelling a journey of well-being. You understand you're in a good relationship with yourself and the world. Sometimes you bump into the chaotic or rigid banks, but you easily bounce back into the meandering middle of the river. Some people think that could call that resilience. The longer people spend stuck on either side of the river, in the chaos or the rigidity, or stuck on both sides of the river at different times, the higher the risk is of a mental health difficulty. So mental health is about integrating or finding a balance between the chaos and rigidity of life that we all experience at times. So how do we know when a child's mentally healthy? We're really interested to hear your thoughts about this. When do you know a child has positive mental health? Let us know in the chat. So, Joanne, what do you see the children you believe are mentally healthy?
So when children are open to affection with educators and when friendships and interactions with other children are occurring, Children are engaged in learning and embracing the people and the environment around them, seeking affection from educators and other children, and laughing, smiling and playing. Janelle, have you noticed anything else?
Yeah, so what about the children who get upset when they're supposed to get upset, like when they're hurt or at separation time? But then they can calm down in a reasonable amount of time. And children who are happy when you expect they would be happy. So children who show emotions at the appropriate time. But also there are children who can regulate their arousal levels at the right time or in context, like calming themselves down when it's rest time or eating time, but they can also ramp it up when it's time to run outside or actively join in a music session. So they're learning to regulate their responses and emotions and behaviours. I think they are two signs of mentally healthy children. So on the other side, Joanne, what have you seen that could mean possible mental health issues?
Children participating in risky behaviours that the child wouldn't normally do. Overly cautious of surroundings and new people. For example, any new visitors visiting the centre. Children become withdrawn and isolate themselves from social groups, behave in ways that do not make immediate sense, and avoid or risk adult contact and interaction. And there's also usually a number or a group of indicators rather than just one isolated behaviour and continuation of these behaviours, not just a one-off.
Yep, absolutely. And I was just thinking as you were talking, Jo, about children who isolate themselves, they could be on the rigid side of the river. So they're really isolating themselves, mean they're in more control. They're in control of what's happening. And the children who are really quick to react could be on the chaotic side of the river. So they're the children that are kind of out of control. That's a way of thinking about children in terms of the river. But as you said, there are some behaviours that can appear quite alarming, but there's usually more to it. So once you suspect there might be an issue, what do you do then? What's your next step?
So we keep a diary with documented behaviours over a period of time, talking to families to find out more information, do more formal observations, also talking to colleagues, other educators, managers and perhaps the Inclusion Support Agency. Refer to Parenting Matters or the Child and Family Centre to gain their support and expertise. And we would also refer to the KidsMatter Beatles Chart.
Excellent. We're going to have another look at another video now from Dr. Luke Toohill, who gives us a timely reminder here about the boundaries we need to work in as educators. So we're just going to move to the short video now.
I think we have to be careful that we're not taking on the role of diagnosing things ourselves, particularly as educators. We might have a lot of practical experience in things, but we're not usually qualified to give a diagnosis. So we have to be careful how we talk about things, so that we're not kind of putting ourselves into a different role to what we are, and thinking about who we might suggest that people could talk to if they want to follow something through further.
That follows on nicely from what Joanne was saying about not diagnosing if we're working as educators and referring on to people that can do a diagnosis if a diagnosis is seen to be appropriate. So now we're going to have a quick look at the Beatles Chart, which is our next slide. And Joanne mentioned the Beatles Chart that's available from our resource list, KidsMatter resource list. This form can be used to gain a richer picture of the child, and it's a way of teasing out and making sense of what you're thinking. So Beatles is an acronym made up of the letters of each of the words across the top. behaviours, emotions, thoughts, learning and social relationships. And there's also space to note the child's strengths and concerns that you originally have down on the left-hand side of the page. And KidsMatter have support materials to assist if you want to explore this further. But a really important section is the section further down the page that gives you a space to think about how pervasive the issues are. So who else is around when the child acts in certain ways? How many settings the child acts in this way? Whether they act like this at home and at school? And how frequent they occur, how long and how intense the actions are. And all this information can form a basis for conversations with families or colleagues and may indicate next steps to take. So some steps could well be those that Joanne mentioned a moment ago. And Amelia, you were going to talk about the other side of this form. This form is two-sided.
Yes, I'm a fan of the second side, I must admit, and not to negate the importance of the first side in any way. And it's interesting, I've noticed throughout the chat, Janelle and Joanne, that there's been lots of discussion about emotions and how we need to allow and enable children to be able to experience and regulate all those emotions, the whole gamut of emotions that are available. Back to the second side. The second side, I think, is a particularly important side of the form, because once we've identified the behaviours, the emotions, the thoughts, and the learning and the social relationships of children who we're actually observing, there's opportunity on the second side of this form to have a think about what we've tried already, what places we've referred to, or where we could potentially refer to, but also, most importantly, how we're actually feeling when we're in the midst of trying to support a child in a particular way. So it's really important to check out that second side as well. The other thing I think that is great about this Beatles tool is that it can actually be used for all children, even if you haven't got a particular concern that a child may be experiencing mental health difficulties, but it can provide a really great way to understand the learning and the learning needs, as well as the strengths that all children that we work with have. So, and I guess, as I mentioned earlier, people have been talking about emotions and the ability to regulate them, and how we can support children to learning about how to do this. And I guess that's probably something you're going to touch base on shortly, isn't it, Janelle and Joanne, around how we define mental health. And for me, I guess emotions is a big part of what's involved in creating a definition of what mental health is. Do you agree?
Absolutely, Amelia. So we might move on to this slide now, which I find a really helpful tool, and it's one of the definitions for early childhood mental health from 0 to 3. And it offers another part to our shared understanding. So I think of this definition of having 3 main components surrounded by all children developing their capacity that occurs within their care environment. So this context encompasses children's emotions, their relationships and their social lives, and how they engage with the environment and learn. So if you think of the river, young children can get stuck on either bank of the river emotionally, socially, and with their environment. So that aim is to find the balance. So if you think of a child you know or work with, how does that child experience, regulate and express their emotions? Do their emotional reactions match what's happening around them? For example, does this child under or overreact in your opinion? And what does this child's relationships look like with other children and adults? Do they seek or resist comfort from all or certain adults? Do they seek company of children? Do they join large groups? What does it look like when he or she is exploring the environment? Does the child stay at one experience or move quickly between experiences, for example? So all of this information is catered for on the Beatles chart, And Amelia is going to allude to some other definitions soon that offer ways to consider mental health. So now we're going to listen to Judy Kynaston, the National Manager of KidsMatter Early Childhood, who's going to summarise this nicely for us in another short video.
Mental health in early childhood is about young children's social and emotional well-being. It includes how children experience and express their emotions, how they develop relationships, and how they explore and discover their environment and the world around them. These skills and experience in early childhood play an important role in laying the foundations for lifelong good mental health and well-being.
Excellent. So now that the videos, we've listened to Judy talking about ways of talking about mental health and defining mental health. There are some places where we can go to find out some more information, and this sort of ties in quite nicely with a couple of questions that have been asked through the chat. Michelle Kay did ask what good programs there are to teach emotional literacy, and also how do we introduce mental health terminology into families was another question that Kay put up for us. So I guess around those questions as well, what Janelle was discussing around those three key elements of defining mental health, I think it's really important to find our answers potentially in there, particularly through the forming of relationships and how we do that as adults, and how we model that to children, how we be involved in that engagement process with children as well. And moving on to other definitions, and part of that around introducing the whole idea of what mental health is and trying to reduce the stigma, could be about working with families around creating your own context-specific mental health definition. And we've got a couple of live links on these screens. One to KidsMatter page, where there's some theory and the current definition that KidsMatter Early Childhood promote. KidsMatter Early Childhood promote for mental health. There's also some information. This is an American-based site, 0 to 3, that has a lot of information around finding a definition for what mental health is as well. And then there's the broader World Health Organization definition that is really important to consider, particularly if we're looking at a community perspective, because this is looking beyond early childhood into across the entire age span, in that it defines mental health as being a space where every individual realises his or her own potential, that they can cope with normal stresses of life, they can work productively and fruitfully, and they're able to make a contribution to his or her community. So again, there's lots of similarities to what Janelle spoke about with the early childhood, in the early childhood context, but just an extension from the World Health Organization. So all those links are live, and you'll be able to find those shortly. And I guess we're drawing closer to the end, and if you've got any more questions that you would like to have a response from myself, Janelle or Joe, please pop them in the chat. But we're moving on to a poll now, and this will be a little bit around planning about how we do work to develop a shared understanding about mental health in our own specific settings and places. So here we are. I'll just pop this poll up now. So we've got some ideas around some things that you could possibly do to develop a shared understanding in your specific context. But if you've got some other ideas that aren't actually up in the poll, please pop them in the chat, because that's one of the great things about these webinars, is that people can actually give each other ideas in the chat box too. So it's a great way to actually connect with people that you wouldn't normally connect with across Australia. So what would you suggest, Janelle or Joanne, around some next steps to gain a shared understanding in your communities?
Well, I think any one of those ideas will help develop that shared understanding. And I really wish I'd have seen the movie Inside Out, because I didn't. And I really want to go and watch that, because I think that would be a really good movie to watch. But I'm just thinking too about the KidsMatter website and Michelle Kay's question about good programs. There is a section on our website that looks at lots of different programs, and the Australian Psychological Society have analysed the programs and looked at to see their strengths. And that's a really good place to go to find out about emotional programs as well.
Definitely. How about you, Joanne? Were any of these things your first steps when you were involved in the KidsMatter pilot? Or was it something else?
No, so after doing the KidsMatter pilot, I went on to researching other elements and just engaging in those conversations, making the KidsMatter posters and materials really visible for other educators, putting posters up on the wall, distributing the information sheet, and just having all those resources there for educators to really draw on.
Yeah, and I guess the big thing around trying to get that shared understanding of mental health is to do something, and even if it is something that you perceive as being a small step, those small steps can grow into much bigger ones as well. So I'll just close that poll down, and we're going to hit people with another poll, I think, but everyone's done this before, this poll, and also you've probably seen it one more time than what you were meant to, because I put it up by accident before. So I'm just going to pop up this poll again, just around how comfortable you feel about talking about mental health or mental health difficulties. We're just wondering if having an opportunity to talk about, listen to us today, but also to share with people in the chat, whether that has actually helped your comfort levels or made you think about things a little bit differently. So if you've got any other comments you'd like to pop in the chat, please do so as well in regard to this poll. So we're getting people, oh, okay, cool. We're getting the very comfortable and the somewhat comfortable is largely. I'm going to stop that poll now.
And I think, Amelia, it was interesting with the poll that we did just a moment ago, and the shortest line was the one talking with families about mental health. So I thought that was really interesting, because that's the area that can be the trickiest.
Can be, yeah, definitely, and that could be potentially for anyone who's an official participating KidsMatter service. That could be something they get some support with their facilitator around, and head to the component 1 or component 3, professional learning. So.
And component 3 in particular has a lot of really good ideas of talking with families. So even how to introduce that term, Kay asked how to introduce the term mental health terminology with families. Do we start with the words mental health, or do we start with the words social and emotional learning? So thinking about the words we use with families, which is what we discussed earlier.
Yes. Definitely, and I think a lot of that is very much context specific, and something that as early childhood services we need to consider who our people in our community are, who we are, what our understanding is, and gauging what our comfort levels are. But also sometimes it's good to sort of seek some support from an external agency or a KidsMatter facilitator potentially. Those sort of people to have a bit of a conversation, and having a conversation as a team is a really important part of that too. Do either of you have anything else that you'd like to add before we move on, or any particular takeaway messages that you'd like people to really have hold of when they leave the session today?
I'm just noticing Karen N's comment about would Inside Out be okay for preschool age children. I haven't seen the movie myself, but it certainly could be a good starting point to talk about emotions, if nothing else. And just talking about the names of emotions is really helpful for children anyway, for their mental health and for their social life. So I think you can always find something you can talk about from movies like that, even if they're not designed for preschool age children. I think the hardest thing would be having the child sit in the movie theatre for 2 hours, more than the content of the movie maybe.
Definitely, and I think as with any movie, be guided by the classification. There's also places that you can go for reviews around how suitable movies are, and often I'm not 100% sure as far as Inside Out what rating it has got, but sometimes those messages may go over the head of children. But sometimes the messages are really good for adults to hear too, and offer us some inroads and some insights into how we can actually talk about things as well. Were there any other questions that popped up, Janelle or Joanne, that you'd like to respond to?
No, but sorry. I was just going to say that my takeaway message would be that it is all right and even desirable to talk about mental health in early childhood as professional educators, but it is really important that we don't make the diagnosis, that we refer out if we do come across children who are experiencing difficulties.
Yeah, definitely, and that offers not only support for children but support for us as educators as well by seeking other professional opinions and ideas. How about you, Janelle?
Yeah, and I think what's crystallised for me just by preparing this webinar today is that we just have to start talking. We just have to start talking about mental health issues, emotions, social issues, and the more we talk about mental health, regardless of the words we use, the better it is. And it's more about feeling comfortable and talking about mental health difficulties freely, just as we talk about physical health difficulties freely. Definitely. And I guess Mental Health Week is coming up, as somebody has reminded us in the chat. So that might be a really good place for us to focus our conversation on mental health.
What better place to launch?
Thank you, Kay. Yes.
Great time to launch into those conversations, and social media is a great way to help that too at times as well. So make sure you like us on Facebook, because we'll be popping lots of friendly talking about mental health messages that are nice and accessible for a range of people and families as well during that week, like we do all weeks. So we've got one more question here from Karen. Oh, it's not a question, but yes, Karen was agreeing that she was thinking about using Mental Health Week as a starting point for talking with families about it too. So that's great. Now we're talking about next steps and what practical things we can do in our own services. So I guess now is probably a good time to also talk about some next steps using the KidsMatter Early Childhood Framework. Now, if you haven't already heard, we are now offering up. We've got more opportunity to provide more support through implementation of the KidsMatter Framework by having facilitators connect with early childhood services. So there are some opportunities for people to actually get started as official KidsMatter participants for the whole of service approach. And you can do these things by either attending, you can set the ball rolling basically by either attending a workshop, joining a webinar, or just getting in touch with us to explore your options as well. Now, all the links up here, these buttons that I'm pointing to, they're actually live links. So you can actually click on these and it will open up a new tab in your browser. So you can click one of these if you would like and then head off to it after the webinar. But remember, hang around a little bit longer for us, because we'll get you to fill in the exit survey and also pop in the names of the people who need certificates as well. There are some other next steps around talking about mental health that we've highlighted that could be opportunities for you using the framework to help guide that space as well. A good place to start is component 1, and I've we've got a link here around the professional learning topics. And the topic one for component one, creating a sense of community, is actually developing a community that promotes mental health. So some of the videos that you've seen today, the snippets that you've seen, that and more is actually available in the professional learning. There's also a step-by-step workbook that people can go through to help support that. So that's a great place to start if you're wanting to start that conversation or continue that conversation further. Another place when we're talking about mental health is, and it relates to component 2, developing children's social and emotional skills, is the Mental Health Matters section of our website. And this has a section specifically for social and emotional learning, and it has a range of information, and it's evidence-based resources that people you can read yourself, or you can provide to your community and your families as well. There's also component 3, and we touched on this a little bit through one of the questions that occurred, and the other thing that comes up is around developing collaborative partnership with parents and educators, and part of that, when we're talking about, okay, how are we going to talk about mental health and how are we going to define mental health, it is around bringing that collaborative partnership with families into it, and getting their opinion, and going on the journey, I guess, together around creating that definition, so everyone is on literally the same page. And then finally, another step, if you're focusing on component 4 at the moment, it's really handy to check out the literature review that was created. And again, that's a collection of evidence and evidence-based research that's been collected by the Australian Psychological Society when the framework was actually being developed. And the areas in that I particularly like are the areas around seeking help and how talking about mental health can encourage people to seek help. But also there's some stuff in there that's really interesting around stigma. So that's worth having a look at as well. So remember, if you want to get started with KidsMatter, click a link. If you want to take some next steps in a particular component area, you can also click a link. And time is almost up. So I'd like to say one more big thank you and goodbye to Janelle and Joanne. They jumped off the camera before I said goodbye. I forgot about that a little bit earlier. So see you later, Janelle and Joanne. And also thank you for the rest of the KidsMatter team who have been helping and answering some questions throughout the session today. And in a moment, we'll all be leaving you, but like I said earlier, please make sure you complete the survey and pop in everyone's email addresses so everyone can receive a certificate. And we really do look forward to keeping in contact with you around this important topic of talking about mental health. So all the different ways that you can connect with us are available. It's also important to check out the KidsMatter Early Childhood webinar, because October is coming and it won't be very far away before our next webinar hits. And this one is a particularly important one too, because it is actually all about talking about our mental health, as educators, how we look after our own mental health, and just thinking about our own mental health, but also how that, by doing that, we're actually supporting young children's mental health too. So I really hope to see you there. And once again, thanks for coming today, and thank you for sharing our commitment to growing healthy minds. Bye everyone.